Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We hit a huge milestone thanks to everyone. We hit 25 subs, so thank you to all of you who have joined us on this incredible journey. We appreciate it so much, and we're just grateful. That's all we can really say, and we hope you continue with us on this journey. But before,
25 subs.
exactly 25 subs, I think that's a pretty big milestone, especially coming from two guys who just want to talk basketball. But before we get started with today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast. But for today's content, it's kind of interesting. And sorry, once again, I know this happens every so often. We laugh during the intro. It's just a running inside joke. Check out our live stream, then you'll understand why. But to start this episode off, this is day 2 of the playoffs. It was wild, extremely crazy, and we did cover part of day 1 in our live stream. So if you missed that, go and check that out. It's up on YouTube under our live section. So come through and on the next one and chill. But for that one, just watch the VOD back, because a lot of this stuff we're going to be abridging, and we don't want to reiterate too much, or regurgitate everything that we said. But we just want to get our thoughts out there. So, going back to yesterday, which was Saturday, we had the Nets versus Sixers. And that game was kind of interesting. 121-101 victory for the 76ers. We talked about it on the live stream. Brooklyn, we both agree that they don't really stand a chance. We can kind of chalk this one up to Philly. I think that's common sense. Harden and Embiid, they're just the better team, better roster, more experience. The Nets, they don't have the chemistry yet, but there are some bright spots in Mikal Bridges, of course, dropping 30, being unstoppable, But with Philly, they were able to stop the bleeding with him very quickly. Easy counters for him. Cam Johnson, he's a bright spot too. Dinwiddie, he's all right. But, Claxton, I think he did all right defensively. But, there's a lot of work for Brooklyn Nets, in the upcoming seasons. But, yeah, we could chalk this one up to Philly, I think. I think they'll easily get this series, probably sweep it if you want me to be completely honest. But, what were your thoughts on this one, just to keep it short?
Yeah. I mean, for me, going in pretty much knowing that Philly was going to outplay Brooklyn in the series, mainly I'm kind of looking at Mikal Bridges and how he kind of responds to being the go-to option in the playoffs. And he did not disappoint. I mean, you look at his performance, 30 points, 12 of 18 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3. A lot of that was in the first half, in fairness, but still, he did show that he can, rise and be a go-to guy in the playoffs. Brooklyn's main problem was just all the turnovers, not really having any real natural go-to scorers other than Bridges, especially at that guard spot. I mean, Dinwiddie's fine, right? But you'd like to have somebody probably a little bit better. You could see like the connection where there were a lot of passes where they were trying to throw lobs to Claxton. And it just, they were passes that were way off.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main issue. Defensively, the strategy was to double Joel Embiid. Right. And obviously Philly had to expect that coming out of the gate. So for him, really the goal was to just, counter the double teams by, passing to the open man, right? Just reading the floor. And he did a really good job at that. It was a really balanced attack from Philly.
Yes.
You didn't need Embiid to score, 30, 40 this game, right? In 26, 7 of 15 from the field, 11 of 11 from the line. But you got other guys to chip in. You got Harden, right, with a good 23 points. My concern with him is just it felt like most of his baskets pretty much were all just jumpers. I think, as a matter of fact, 8 of 21 from the field, 7 of those makes were from 3.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when he was trying to drive, right, he was getting blocked. The shot just wasn't falling, and that's kind of something to watch for because he was pretty good during the midway early stretch of the season.
For sure.
Right, and then he had his injuries, right, and then he just hadn't been the same since. I don't think it's going to hurt him against Brooklyn, right, but in the next round against, probably against Boston, right, I think that's something to keep an eye on. Tyrese Maxey had an okay performance, right, 13 points. Tobias Harris was really good, 21. And then you also had some decent bench performances, right? Paul Reed, George Niang, McDaniels, right? But again, it is Brooklyn. So to me, I went into this series expecting Philly to win, and no surprises here. It was, even though it was a 20-point game, it was close for a while, but you just feel like Brooklyn is better.
Yeah.
Jacques Vaughn mentioned after the game, that I guess he didn't necessarily care for the officiating, but at the same time, I just don't think that's usually the reason you lose in a 20-point loss.
No.
Philly just shot out of their minds, and I just think they're a better team overall. So, I mean, we'll see how Brooklyn responds in game two, but this is a series that I think is probably, is more close to being over than it is to being a real series.
Yeah,
But
and I think
you never know. It's just one game, and you don't want to overreact.
what Philly set like was it a franchise record? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
I can't remember. Yeah,
franchise record
for
21
threes.
threes,
Yeah.
21 of 43. So 48% from three for the game. That's really good and
And
not
that's why they
necessarily.
lost. That's
Yeah,
why Brooklyn
but I
lost.
mean Brooklyn shot well from three too.
Yeah.
13 of 29,
Mm-hmm.
right? So not as many 3-point makes, but still pretty good efficiency.
Yes. And like we said, we're keeping this short and sweet. If you want our full and, in-depth breakdown and real thoughts on this, go check out the live stream. It is up on YouTube once again. But to move on, we've got Celtics Hawks. This one was pretty much a blowout from the jump. Celtics took this one 112-99. And it kind of goes back to the same thing that we were just talking about with the 76ers, It just comes down to who's better, and I think the Celtics are light years ahead of the Hawks. We've talked about it multiple times. The Hawks are one of our more disappointing teams, and I think that goes for everyone. So, it's just underwhelming, and I don't think they really stand a chance against the Celtics either. So, what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, going in Boston, it just felt like especially in that first half, just had some really flawless execution. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they were up by 30 at halftime, so it felt like the game was pretty much over then. I mean, you never normally want to say that a game is over after one half, but it definitely was. I mean, I think it was like 74-44.
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta did make a run, to kind of get back into the game, but it felt more so like Boston took their foot off the gas more so than Atlanta like is actually really like much of a threat. Robert Williams came off the bench, right? He had been battling injuries for much of the season, and he had a big impact off the bench,
Yeah.
especially defensively and in terms of getting those boards, and just being a lob threat, which I think helps them is on offense as well. So I mean, the key for me, for Boston, pretty much is just Robert Williams, just getting him right, getting him back into a rhythm. Because I mean, I don't think Atlanta has any shot at beating Boston. So I think in this case, it's more so just about getting your guys right, getting out of that round healthy, and preparing for the next round. Obviously, you still have to focus on the opponent that you're facing right now, but I don't
Yeah.
think Atlanta stands a chance. And I guess for Atlanta, I guess the question for them is that once the series is done, we had heard so many rumors, about maybe they might make some wholesale changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chris Haynes reported earlier in the season that Trae Young might be a guy, that might ask out if his team ends up being a disappointment. Right? It looks like they're headed for, a pretty disappointing season, right? A first round exit as the seventh seed,
Yeah.
right? And then it was kind of substantiated a little bit by we heard from the ringer, Kevin O'Connor, where he reported that Atlanta's ownership has given the front office the green light to, make pretty much any moves necessary, that they feel like they want to do. And that
Yeah.
includes Trae Young. So I don't know what they're going to do about that because, again, it's another situation where, ideally, like, it's a situation where he'd have to be okay with going somewhere. But, like, at the same time, like, what situation is much better than Atlanta that needs a point guard? I don't know. So we'll have to see about that. But, just specifically focusing on the basketball, it just shows that, like you said, Boston's just on another level compared to Atlanta.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I think this is probably going to end up in a sweep. But to move on, we've got Knicks Cavaliers. This was more entertaining, I think, than the other two games, and very close throughout the entire game. It was pretty much a back and forth one. And we were both very high on Cleveland coming into this season and throughout the season as well. But there's some glaring issues that they have, and just to reiterate my points from the live stream. For me, their keys to success are, Darius Garland needs to be more aggressive on offense. We need to see him with the ball in his hands not equally, but, just a little bit less than Donovan Mitchell, but, more than what he showcased on Saturday. That's not going to be enough to cut it. And I need to see them, play with some fight and some energy and get some O boards, hustle. Because it seems like there wasn't any hustle with this team. And I know that's kind of cliche, bringing you back to like, your middle school days of playing basketball where your coach tells you to hustle. But it's real, you need to be out there fighting for rebounds, doing the little stuff. And I don't think the Cavs did the little stuff, unfortunately. Donovan Mitchell, he put up 38, which is, something that we're accustomed to, but it clearly wasn't enough. The team needs to step up and get around him. But, obviously the big thing that happened with this game was Julius Randle actually playing. I think this game would have probably gone differently if Randle didn't play. And, they probably would have won by even more if RJ actually showed up. He didn't really have too much of an impact on this game. 7.6 assists, 4 rebounds. That's not really the level that you want to see RJ Barrett playing at. But, shout out to Jalen Brunson. He basically put the game away. He played stellar, and Cleveland really had no answer for him. There were multiple possessions where he just took every single person who was on him, on the ISO, specifically Osman, Chetty Osman. But, what were your thoughts on this one? Because I'm not going to say I'm completely worried. I think, Cleveland just needs to iron out the details and get the kinks out of this thing and get it rolling,
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty back and forth game, pretty much the entire way, right? Neither team really led by a large amount for most of the game. I guess, from the Cavs perspective, I think where you're probably most disappointed is probably Evan Mobley, right? Because, he's the guy that during the second half of the season, played really well, and it looked like he was taking the lead. He just had a poor performance offensively against the Knicks. And, the Knicks are a big physical team.
Yeah, you got Mitchell Robinson.
Yeah, exactly. They have a lot of size. In the second half, right? They went back and forth between Robinson and Hartenstein, and both of those guys, and they closed with Hartenstein, right? Both those guys are big physical guys. Randall's a big physical dude. But that's kind of the key for Cleveland because, their bench wasn't great, but I just think in general their bench is probably not going to help them out a ton. Right? Dean Wade really didn't give them anything. Jetty Osman was okay. He was the guy, like you mentioned, that was kind of unfortunately had to guard Jalen Brunson, right? Because obviously Mitchell and Garland probably wouldn't be able to do that and score on offense, right? Rubio didn't really give them much of anything, right? Karis LeVert didn't really give them much of anything. And you just, you just can't have that lack of production from all those guys. I mean, I know what you want me to say in terms of Karis LeVert. Yeah, it just
say it, man.
Having guys like Karis LeVert that are, brought in as scorers and, he's not really able to score. It's an unfortunate situation to be in. And I'm not trying to put it all on him, but I just think with Cleveland, just you didn't get enough from your secondary guys because Mitchell played well enough to win. Garland was okay. I think, in terms of his playmaking, I think that could have been better. He had 5 turnovers, right, which I think is way too many considering he only had 1 assist.
And no shots in the second half, I don't think.
Yeah, Jared Allen was all right. So I'm kind of, but at the same time, Isaac Okoro, 0-4 from 3. He's kind of a guy that hasn't been great shooting the ball at times. He's more of an attacker type of guy. You just, that was the main thing. They lost by 4. Right, so you just needed one more guy to show up and have like a decent, like if one of either Mobley or Okoro had a better game, right, then Cleveland probably could have won because they had a late lead in the game, right? Then Josh Hart turns his ankle and hits a big 3,
which was crazy. Was great. Yeah,
17 points, 10 rebounds. So I want to give the Knicks a lot of credit too, like you mentioned. Jalen Brunson was awesome. Randall, obviously played, came back from that foot injury.
Yep.
Had a solid game. Barrett struggled, but. We thought that this was probably going to be a long series. We did think Cleveland was going to win, but it wasn't going to be, like a sweep or a 5-game series.
Not at all.
This would probably go 6-7 because the Knicks are a good team, right? It doesn't always feel like it, but the Knicks are a formidable team, and they do have a guy in Jalen Brunson now. Unlike in the last couple of seasons where you have a reliable, dependable guy at the guard spot, that can kind of get you offense, either for himself or for others. And that's valuable, especially late in the game, right? Cleveland has that too with Garland and Mitchell, but you just needed a couple other guys to show up. But again, for Cleveland, they have at times struggled on the offensive end.
Yeah.
Their defense has normally always been great, but their offense can sometimes be up and down. When their offense is clicking, right, they're really good, and I think they're better than the Knicks. But when you look at a game where they only scored 97 points, I mean, it's pretty hard to win, in a modern NBA and not being able to hit 100. That's really tough to do.
For sure. Yeah. So moving on into like kind of, I guess, the marquee matchup that everybody kind of wanted to see on Saturday was Warriors-Kings. Kings took the win, 126-123. This was probably, I think, more entertaining than the
This
the
was the best
Knicks,
game.
yeah, than the Knicks Cavs game, just because it was just back and forth, a bunch of highlights. Nobody could really stop anybody, if you want me to be honest. But starting with the winners, De'Aaron Fox, crazy. Malik Monk, crazy. Shout out those guys. They've been hooping on a different level. Sabonis, I was kind of that was an underwhelming performance from him. I think he can do better. We know he can do better. Harrison Barnes, he hit some great shots, and Trey Lyles hit some big shots too. But this game was very interesting because the Warriors just, I don't know, for a team, with this roster, they can't get any stops, and it probably will hurt them, especially on the road. I'm sure they'll be better at home, but on the road, I don't know if they can really. They might not be able to win, a whole lot on the road in these playoffs. It seems like their regular season woes are kind of creeping into the playoffs. I know it's only one game, but I'm just judging off of the small sample size that we have. What were your thoughts on this one? Because I thought this was very disappointing for the Warriors. I think they should be
Yeah,
disappointed in
I mean,
themselves.
it's kind of interesting. We went into the postseason, and I think a lot of people, were not necessarily super high on the Kings, going into this postseason, right?
Hmm.
Everybody mentioned it, including us, right? How that 6 seed, whoever got it was, that was the coveted seed to have in the first
Yes.
round in the West because, of the top 3 seeds, Denver, Memphis, Sacramento. It felt like Sacramento was probably the weakest one,
Hmm.
just because, right, a bunch of guys that don't have much playoff experience, right, a new team, a new head coach, um, so just, and also they're not really a great defensive team, but I mean, this team obviously, as we've talked about all season, like this team is unbelievable on offense.
Yeah.
I mean, like you mentioned, De'Aaron Fox, 38 points, 5 assists, 3 steals, 13 of 27 from the field, right, so just under 50%. Scoring 38 points, that's great. Malik Monk, right, with his playoff coming out party, right? He was great for the Lakers last year. He's been
Hmm.
great for the Kings this year, um, right? And the funny thing with those guys is, I mean, they when you look at the 3-point shooting, right? De'Aaron Fox with 4 of 8, which is pretty high for him, right?
Yeah. Very.
He's normally like 32-ish%. Malik Monk is a good 3-point shooter, but only 4 attempts. A lot of their baskets came from mid-range and in,
Yes.
being able to drive to the basket. You did mention the defense with the Warriors. I don't think their guards are going to really be able to stop Fox and
No.
Malik Monk. I mean, Gary Payton is probably the one best equipped to do it, but he's only one guy, and I mean, he can't play the entire game. He did
No.
close the game. He played 20 minutes, but Fox is still just an incredibly quick athlete. And he's really smart, so I just think like that's just a tough cover to ask. I mean,
Yeah.
they did a good job, I think, defending Sabonis pretty
For
well.
sure. They shut
But
him down, I
yeah,
think.
they kind of kept him in a spot where he was away from the basket, and he was forced to either kind of drive in and take it up on 2 guys, or take some jumpers. And he's not a great outside shooter, so I mean, I guess and then you look at the Warriors side. Steph, I thought he played pretty well. Had a lot of turnovers, which is kind of rough, but overall, like I think he had a positive, impactful game.
Yeah.
Klay Thompson, had stretches where he was good. Also had some stretches where he wasn't great. 21 points, but 8 of 19, 5 of 14 from three.
Hmm.
Um, DiVincenzo, the minutes he played was fine, right? Draymond, I thought, did his normal thing in terms of defensive
Yeah.
uh,
Prowess. Yeah.
prowess with the rebounding and the playmaking and the defense on Sabonis. Looney also solid game.
Hmm.
Poole was not great.
No.
17 points, right, but 4 of 10, and he obviously wasn't able to close because of the lack of defense. Wiggins was, the highlight, or not, yeah, the highlight for the Warriors. I think Wiggins was really good in his return
Yeah.
from his personal thing going on, right? 4 blocks, 17 points, 7 of 16. Had the unfortunate situation where he was kind of set up to take the game tying three, and he knew it probably wasn't going in, even though he
Yeah.
was wide open. It's just tough to be out of the game for 2 months and then come back and be put in a spot like that.
Yeah.
Um, right? And again, they had another chance to tie the game. With Steph taking that three, and again, it just didn't fall. So
That was a
yeah,
bad. I didn't like that shot at all. Sorry to cut you
yeah,
off.
it's hard to say that a shot with Steph Curry is a bad shot.
But that one was
'Cause
bad. It was. I mean, that was basically a floater three, bro.
yeah, I guess, but I don't. You just never know because like
I
if he
know. I
makes
know.
it, then yeah. But either way, I guess it wasn't great execution, but
Yeah,
I guess the key for me in this series is just who's going to be able to stop somebody. Because again, this was a pretty high scoring game back and forth.
very.
The Kings played a pretty poor offensive first half, and they weren't getting blown out. So you kind of felt like it was going to go one of either way. It was going to
Right.
go, one of two directions, right? Either the Warriors would eventually just pull away, or Sacramento's offense would kind of, roar back, and that's what happened. The other factor that we didn't mention as much as we should have in the live stream was that home crowd for
Oh
Sacramento
yeah,
was incredible.
that was
I mean, it
insane.
had been, yeah, I mean, it had been, 15 years or whatever since they had missed the playoffs. Um, I had heard from some other people that they didn't necessarily believe that the crowd was going to be that big for Sacramento. They thought that maybe a lot of Warriors fans would show up,
Right.
but I mean they showed out, and I mean they drowned out everybody. So I mean they were incredibly excited to have playoff basketball return. So it's
Yeah.
just kind of a crazy situation when you got all four teams in California in the playoffs all at the same time, and you got two going against each other right now, both housed in Northern California. So just a pretty great basketball atmosphere. Obviously, just going back to the series, I don't know because I thought that the Warriors would win the series. I think they still will, but their defense has got to be better than that. I mean, the
Yeah.
Kings had the best offense this season, but I just when I look, like you said, when I look at the talent on the floor, it just feels like Golden State's got to be better. I mean, you got Steph, you got Clay, you got Wiggins, you got Poole, you got Kuminga, you got Draymond. I just feel like that this team should be better than Sacramento. And I mean, of course, they could have a great game too, and Sacramento plays awful, and then we all look silly. But I don't know. I can't overreact to one game, but I don't know. I guess like Golden State wins the game, then you're not necessarily worried, but
Right.
they got to be better defensively. I just
For sure.
because again, this Kings team, you got to take it seriously. I mean, I know we
Exactly.
talked about it where we didn't necessarily know how far they could go in the playoffs, but again, they're the number 3 seed in the Western Conference, right? 3-6 upset, or the upsets of higher seeds are always very difficult to pull off. Golden State's been very, poor on the road,
Mm-hmm.
11-30, right? I think the one of the worst road records of in the NBA this season.
I
So
believe so. Yeah.
but if they're gonna go back to back, I mean, you got it starts with winning on the road because you don't have home court advantage. So you have to take at least one of these two games because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously we've seen teams go down 2-0 and come back, and that team's been through a lot. They've had a lot of experience, but I don't know. They got to win next game, or I think this series is, they're in real danger of losing. Not getting swept necessarily, but
Yeah.
it's going to be much harder if you can't steal at least one game in Sacramento.
Yeah. They need to set the tone early. I think that's what it comes down to. And moving on, that was it for the recap. Of the
For day
games
one.
for the Saturday games, day one. So moving on into day two, we got the first matchup, which was the Lakers Memphis Grizzlies. That was really, I think, a hyped up matchup. Obviously it's the Lakers, LeBron. Lakers came away 128-112. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one first, as you're a Laker fan. But, all I have to say, off rip is our X factors that we chose showed up and out. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, spot on from us because, they did their thing. But, go off. Take it away, man.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of you, I suppose. Obviously the final score, was a 16-point game, but it's not necessarily indicative of how most of the game was. It was pretty
Right.
back and forth. But just going back to that X factors point, yeah, I mean my X factors for this series was a lot of the LA's guards, right? So D'Angelo Russell, Austin
Mm-hmm.
Reeves, Dennis Schroeder, and then one of their wings off the bench, like say Rui Hachimura or Vanderbilt as a starter, and we kind of have to start there, right? As you mentioned, we start with the winning team. D'Angelo Russell in the starting lineup, right? He had a really bad game against Minnesota, but he
Yeah.
was pretty good in this game. 19 points, 4 rebounds, 7 assists, 7 of 17, 3 of 9 from three. Not great, but still a positive plus 20 on the night.
Yeah.
Um, right. I thought he struggled early in the game where he, had some good looks and they unfortunately missed, but his playmaking was solid. But his offense came through as the game went on, and he had a much better performance. Austin Reeves, right, the other guard that we mentioned, obviously he had a great uh, fourth quarter, especially, right. He had, he was pretty solid for most of the game, but the fourth quarter was where he shined, pretty much 5 of 5. In the fourth quarter, right, hit all the big shots down the stretch to put the game away, right. Of
Yeah.
course, you heard him scream, "I'm him,"
Yeah. He's him,
as
man.
exactly as the timeouts was going on. I mean, that was kind of the big thing going on in the starting five. And then obviously you had the bench, right? Rui Hachimura, um, had a great game. I mean, 11 of 14 from the field, 5 of 6 from three,
Yeah.
29 points, right? Just, really solid on both ends of the floor, right? Defense in terms of rebounding, contesting shots. Schroeder, right, didn't necessarily have a huge offensive outing, but I thought the minutes that he played were pretty solid, especially, on the defensive end and just being another guy, kind of get to the basket. Um, just kind of interesting because LeBron and AD didn't necessarily have huge offensive performances.
Right.
Right. LeBron had 21, 11 and 5, 8 of 16 from the field, 3 of 8, 3 steals, 2 blocks. I thought for a good chunk of the game, he didn't play that well. He played much better down the stretch, but I thought for a good chunk of the game, he was playing pretty poorly. Just in terms of turnovers, a lot of ill-advised passes. I thought
Yeah.
his defensive uh, uh, prowess in the first half wasn't that great, but again, similar to the Minnesota game, he did much better. AD was great, especially on the defensive end. 7 blocks, 3 steals. I mean, anytime anybody was around him, they just couldn't score. Obviously, had a big injury scare towards the end of the first half, right, where he had the issue with his arm.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like a stinger, right? But obviously, when a guy says, "I can't feel my arm," that's never good.
Right.
Um, right, and then he came back in the second half and still played great. So great performance from them. Jared Vanderbilt also, just wanted to mention, obviously nothing crazy offensively, but I thought his defense on John Morant was great. And that was kind of a key that we talked about
Mm-hmm.
going into the game, right? Where, how are you going to be able to slow down John? They honestly did a pretty good job.
Yeah, they
We're
did.
going to the Grizzlies. He had 18 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 8 of 14, right? Hit some shots at different points in the game, but overall, I thought his effect was pretty limited for the most part. It was really other guys. Jaren Jackson Jr. had a great game, 31, 5 and 4. Nobody on
No.
LA could really do anything about it. He was able to stay out of foul trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Desmond Payne, 6 of 18, right? So not a great performance there. Um, Dylan Brooks, right, was okay, right? 2 of 9 from three, right? Defense was fine, but just in general, it just felt like down the stretch that the Lakers were just the more composed team. But then obviously you also have to factor in, like we mentioned with the AD injury, Ja also went down with a
Yeah.
hand injury. Um, right, and obviously that's not great news if you're Memphis, right? Because Ja Morant is obviously your best player, that's your superstar. Right, he drove down the lane, right, trying to drive through AD. Right,
Mm-hmm.
AD took a charge, and unfortunately, he landed on his hand and looked like he aggravated the hand that he had hurt late in this regular season.
Right.
Um, listening to the comments in the locker room, it didn't sound that positive like they'll end up playing game two. Obviously we'll have to see, but to quote him, he said his status was in jeopardy. Woj reported that he wasn't even really able to undo a balled up pair of socks. So
Yeah.
obviously that's pretty unfortunate if you're Memphis, right? To have another series potentially similar to last year where your best player isn't available, and that could potentially change the whole the whole scope of the series because
Yeah.
if he either A doesn't come back or B has to miss a few games, this series could be closer to being over. Before it even really began. Obviously, it's still one game. So there's still plenty of time, to turn the series around if you're Memphis. But if you're LA, you got to be pretty happy because this is the win this is the scenario that you needed. You needed to go into game one, and take the game from Memphis, right? When Memphis
Yeah.
was great at home, right? I think going into this game they were 31 and 6, I believe at home, or oh, no, 35 and 6
Yeah.
at
I think it
home,
was 35
right?
and 6. Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. So, they pretty much came in and did what they needed to do. So now with Memphis, it kind of comes down to can you make whatever necessary adjustments you need to make, and can you get Ja back? Because again, I know that they've been really good record wise without Ja, but I still feel like you need him for the ultimate goal if you're going to go far in the playoffs, right? You
Yeah.
may be able to last for a game without him, may be able to last a couple of games without him, but I don't think you can go an entire series and be able to win against another good team without your best player. And we said going into this series that this was closer to a 2-3 type of matchup than a 2-7
Yeah.
matchup. Obviously, upsets are still hard, right? Because again, you have to factor in home court advantage and all that other and all those other elements. But still, right? We knew that this had the potential to be a really good series. So now we just kind of have to see where it goes from here.
Yeah. Because, I mean, honestly, looking at the roster side by side, this Lakers roster on paper, to me, looks a little bit better than the Grizzlies. I don't know if you can agree with that, but,
Understand that because you also have to factor in you have LeBron and Anthony Davis,
right.
right? And those two guys, are supposed, are top 10 players, right? So you start there, and then you have a decent supporting cast. So, obviously you can see, right, like why this is a team that a lot of people, believe that, can go far. I think they can go far. It's not going to be easy,
Yeah,
but I think that this team is better than their record. They struggled so much during the early part of the year that, you look at them as the seventh seed and, you look at a normal seventh seed and think that it's not really that great, right? But
exactly.
in the last 2 months, they've had one of the best records since the trade deadline. I think,
Yeah,
yeah, I think them and Memphis, I think, have two of the best records, at least in the Western Conference, since the deadline.
yeah. But for me, the Grizzlies, I don't know. They've got a lot to improve on. I'd like to see Kennard get a few more shots up because he's a really good shooter. I think he's around like 40 something, 40,
I think since he's
49.
been in Memphis, he shot over
Yeah,
50%.
yeah, it's
But
like 50,
obviously that's
50
not a
something, but
yeah,
like,
it's not a sustainable percentage. But we
right.
know he's a perfect
Yeah.
outside shooter.
Like I'd want to see him shoot more volumes of threes. And this game was kind of dictated by, Ja Morant going down and whatnot, and other factors too. But there's just some guys out here that I just don't think need to be out there as much, And I understand, you have Jaren Jackson Jr., who's, one of their only defensive big men, but the Santi Aldama, he's all right, but he's just not enough, I don't think. But for me, Tyus Jones is an elite, backup point guard. I think he's one of the better ones in the league. But I'd
I
just
agree.
like to see him get more minutes. If you really need to rest Ja, I'd like to see him do a little bit more. I mean, I know he had like 25 minutes, but I'd
Yeah,
really want to see him get closer to 30. If you want me to be completely honest, I think that would be a little bit more helpful than having, Tillman out there. I just don't think Tillman has the best impact, especially against a team like the Lakers where you have, AD and LeBron, and, it just didn't look good. It didn't seem like the Grizzlies had a game plan for this one, It just seemed like they were feeding the hot hand. I think that's what was going on with this. But
yeah,
the Lakers, it seemed like they, strategized on this and really thought out, how are we going to stop Ja and who needs to step up? Because, like you said, Rui Hachimura stepped up. And that's something that, Washington fans have, we've seen flashes of it over the years. I don't even think 29 is his career high, So we've seen him put up some high scoring games. But, it all just comes down to consistency. My only concern is with the Lakers is, can they be consistent enough to take this series and play at this level? Because I think this game is the ideal level that you want to see your guys playing at as a team. I'm sure you'd want to see LeBron and AD do more offensively, but team wise, I think this is what you want. You'd want Austin Reeves to go off. You'd want D'Lo to have a solid outing. And D'Lo's not the most he didn't have the most efficient game, but I think this is a solid showing. It was enough. It was just enough to outscore the other team. You want your bench guys to come in there and have an impact, especially, the weaker spots like the wings. So, for me, I think this is a good sign for the Lakers, bad sign for the Grizzlies. They need to game plan on this, re-strategize, and, hopefully prey on Ja being able to play.
because yeah, the Ja thing is really crucial. I
That's
mean,
the big
again,
thing.
like I
Yeah.
said, I know that they have a really good record without Ja, but I still believe that if you want to advance far in the playoffs, you need him because
Yeah.
I just think the playoffs are very different from the regular season. He's their best player, so you need him, and you need him to beat this Lakers team, right? Because because outside of Ja, the other guys you're not necessarily as worried about in terms of being able to just drive to the basket and kind of force their way, right? It's
Right.
really only Jaren Jackson Jr., right? You're not obviously Desmond Bain can attack the basket, right? But not with the same level of force, as John Morant can, right?
Yeah.
Same with Dylan Brooks, right? Luke Kennard's obviously mainly a shooter. Tyus Jones is, pretty much more, floaters as opposed to, being able to drive and dunk, right? Or,
Right.
those acrobatic layups. So you need him, right? Because he makes your offense more dynamic. He helps you out in transition. And that was kind of where, when it was going back and forth and Memphis was leading, that was where Memphis was beating the Lakers, right? Where the Lakers, whenever they turned over the ball or took, 4 shots, right? Memphis was able to get out and run. And that's really the key for Memphis to win the
Exactly.
series is whenever they get stops, they have to get out and run, right? And that's harder to do if you don't have Ja, right? Because
Right.
now the Lakers, whenever they get stops, right, they can go out, get out and run too. And it's easier to get stops if Ja's not out there. So his return is going to be really crucial.
Yeah.
Like I said, I just don't know if he plays in game two because it didn't sound all that positive. I mean, if he couldn't even tie his shoes or pick up his socks,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. But in fairness, though, game two isn't until Wednesday. So that's plenty of time, to possibly see where he's at. But who knows at this point?
Yeah. Um,
Just
yeah, that's probably one of the series that I think everybody's going to have their eye on. I think that's one of the higher tiered series is, or series is, what the hell am I saying? Series, But moving on, we've got Miami at Milwaukee.
Yep.
This one was crazy because the Heat, they did
Yeah.
stun the Bucks, and everyone was talking about, how sloppy the Heat have looked as of recent, but they come out and steal game one, which is crazy. But there were a couple of injuries on both sides, or two injuries, one on each side. Excuse me.
Yep.
You had Tyler Hero go down. I believe he broke his hand, something along those
Ring
lines.
finger and middle finger.
Okay, yeah. So he broke some fingers, which is bad, and I think it was on his shooting hand. So he'll be out for a while.
4 6 weeks.
Yeah, and then you have Giannis on the other end. I believe it was a tailbone injury. He had an awkward landing after Kevin Love tried to take a charge. Giannis came down hard. I mean, you could hear the thump, and you immediately knew like that was a tailbone injury. So he only played 11 minutes. So that's pretty wild. So, understandable how Miami did take this one. I think the Bucks were a little bit stunned by that. But to be fair, the Bucks were down before Giannis even, got hurt. So it wasn't looking good for them in the beginning. But, Giannis being out did not help. And, I think it's kind of interesting because a lot of people have talked about, Giannis not playing, but the Bucks still winning without him. So, could this be where Middleton needs to step up? Because he sure as heck did step up tonight. He had 33 points, 4 assists, 9 rebounds. Just wasn't enough because, it's the Miami Heat, playoff Jimmy. I think that kind of goes, without saying. He had 35, 11 assists, 5 rebounds. So, it just wasn't enough. And Brooke Lopez, Drew Holiday, Bobby Portis, they all had great games. Grayson Allen had a great game, unfortunately. But, with the Heat, I just think they just won this game purely off of shock. I think the fact that Giannis went down, then when a player like that goes down and they announce it in the arena, the life of in the arena kind of gets sucked out. There's just not as much. It's not a playoff environment anymore. It's kind of like we might lose this game because of Giannis, being out. So I think that's kind of what happened, and it was just a shock factor loss. But I'm sure the Bucks will bounce back. But this Miami Heat team does have some grit to it, and don't. I'm not saying an upset is coming or anything like that, but you can expect Miami to probably steal one more game, but I think that's the most that they'll probably steal. But they did look way better than they did, in the earlier playing games or in the play-in. Excuse me. What were your thoughts on this one?
So in terms of like this game, I think I kind of do agree where, when your star player goes down, it's obviously a shock to your team system.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, Milwaukee wasn't playing well before he went out. They were trailing double digits, relatively early. They would
Yeah.
sometimes kind of get it back in, and then Miami would pull away. I mean, Miami had 130, which you don't necessarily see from them, right? I think
Right.
they're one of the worst offensive teams in the league this season.
Yeah, I think they
Right,
are
and
the
that's
worst
just
scoring team.
yeah,
They might
exactly. And
be. Yeah.
yeah, and that's despite even Tyler Hero, who's a solid offensive player, that despite him getting hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's out for 4 to 6 weeks, so
Mm-hmm.
he's probably done for the series, depending on whatever, right? Because I mean I doubt this. I mean 4 to 6 weeks is a month plus,
It's a
so
month and a half.
yeah. I mean, but Jimmy Butler, obviously, like you mentioned, was great. Gabe Vincent, Bam, finally had a really solid offensive outing.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Love off the bench was really good.
Yeah.
Right, kind of looking like the guy that they were hoping to get
And
when they
he
signed him.
drew
Right,
he
Lowry,
drew a few charges too, I think.
yeah, 18 points, eight
Mm-hmm.
rebounds, like you mentioned, drew the charges. Kyle Lowry didn't really do a whole lot, right?
No.
In his new role off the bench. Caleb Martin, right, also another solid game. It
Mm-hmm.
just it's kind of like what we mentioned with Miami in the play-in, right, where they didn't shoot well against Atlanta, right, but they shot 15 of 25 from three against Milwaukee. So obviously Milwaukee made it a game at different points, right, but it just didn't feel like Milwaukee was going to win.
Right.
For me, kind of like part of this series was more so a Middleton get back or get right series for me,
Mm-hmm.
right, in terms of can Chris Middleton kind of find himself again. And like you said, he definitely did that tonight, right? Had kind of a vintage performance. 2 of 7 from three, but still, right? 12 of 20 from the field, 33 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists. So I guess for me, the main thing is, can Giannis come back? Because I
Right.
mean, I'm not saying, like you said, I don't necessarily think the Heat will win the series, but if Giannis is out for like, the next 2, 3 games, right, then it starts to get, kind of problematic. But
Hmm.
it didn't necessarily seem like they were all that, super concerned. I think they mentioned, we'll see where he is tomorrow, right? And they don't play until Wednesday, so they get a decent amount of time off,
Yeah.
right? So obviously we'll see where we're at by then. But if he comes back, I think it'll still probably be, I think Milwaukee will still win. But obviously, it doesn't feel great to give up game one on the road. But game one upsets on the road happen a lot. I mean, when we think about it, like when you go back and look at a lot of playoff series in the past, sometimes the lower seed, even the 8th seed will win game one.
Yeah.
Um, and then, it's kind of a shock to the system where everybody's like, oh my goodness, is the number one seed going to lose, right? And then they end up, winning fourth straight. So
Exactly.
stuff like that always happens. So you can't overreact to one game,
And
and
sorry,
given how,
I
exactly, and given
yeah.
how,
Yeah. I was gonna say one thing. Sorry, I really didn't want to cut you off, but Jimmy
good,
Butler, he's historically amazing in first games, opening games for um
yeah,
playoff series. So, this doesn't, change, I don't think, our point of view, or, we, like you said, we don't think that, Miami's gonna come out here and just take the series from them. I think, you know, Milwaukee's going to bounce back. But, Jimmy Butler does normally have a good first playoff game. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
but yeah, just in general. So I'm not gonna necessarily overreact to it. It just depends on whether or not Giannis is back, right? Because if he comes back and he's fine, they should be able to take care of Miami. Because again, like, I just feel like there's more evidence to point to Miami just hasn't been that great this season. Obviously, they did show, some fight and some grit in that play-in game, and obviously they did play very well today.
Yeah.
It's just the issue is we just haven't seen it consistently. So we got to see it consistent, right? If they can, get game two, right, in Milwaukee, right, and they can get game 3 or 4 in Miami, right, then we'll see where we're at. But for now, I think you just kind of have to chalk it up to injuries, right? Because obviously, if you're Milwaukee and you're without Giannis for most of the game, right, like that's tough, right? Because even though they were down, if Giannis had played the whole game and hadn't gotten hurt, maybe they come back and win.
Right.
So
Exactly.
you just never know. Obviously, injuries are always a factor with any and every team, right? It doesn't matter. Obviously, some teams we have to be concerned about, with guys in terms of their durability more so than others,
Yeah.
right? Like, say, like you're worried more so about, say, somebody like, say, Anthony Davis or, Paul George or somebody like that, right, who tends to miss much more time, right, than you are with Giannis, right? But
Yeah.
still, even he can miss games as well, right? So injuries always play a factor, and I think that's pretty much what happened, in this game as well.
Yeah. This has potential to hurt the Bucks a lot, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, if any, I will say this: like Milwaukee does have a fair amount of depth,
Hmm.
so it's possible, right, that they could. I mean, because we've seen them do it before, right? The year that they won the title, they did win a couple games against Atlanta, without Giannis. But
Yeah.
again, right, like Miami's an experienced team in
Hmm.
fairness, right? So you do have to take them seriously, but I still think Milwaukee should win this series. Just get out of this series healthy, right? Hopefully
Yes.
Giannis isn't out for a prolonged period of time, because if he is, that could be a problem for their title run.
Right.
But if he comes back next game, I think
Yeah.
and then to move on to the next game, we had the highly anticipated Clippers Suns game, right? Obviously, a ton of storylines there. Obviously, no Paul George for the Clippers, right? But still, right? Kawhi Leonard versus KD, Russ versus his old teammate, right? Obviously, Devin Booker, Eric Gordon, all of those other guys, right? And the Clippers ended up winning in what felt like a pretty like big win for them,
Hmm.
115-110. Kawhi Leonard led the way with 38 points,
Yeah.
5 assists, 5 rebounds, right? It was pretty much, in my opinion, I think the best player on the floor. Um, in a game where Durant played pretty well too, but also it was just kind of strange when you watch the Suns, and it kind of felt like over the course of the game, you kind of saw the lack of continuity did hurt them. It didn't really feel like they knew what they were doing late in the game, right? Durant didn't really touch the ball. It was a lot of Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton. Um, I wouldn't necessarily be too worried if I'm the Suns, right? Because obviously it's just game one, and we've seen how a lot of these series go, where the underdog ends up winning game one, and then the better team tends to win the rest of the way. But this is something to kind of just keep in mind, right? Because I mean, you got to hope that say Chris Paul, can have a better game because they need him because they don't really have a lot of depth.
Yeah.
So you really need all 5 of your starters to play really well in order to win. And it didn't necessarily happen tonight. Also, big shout out to Russell Westbrook. Even though he was 3 for 19, he made a lot of really big plays at the end of the game with
Yeah.
offensive. got some really key stops. So just kind of interesting where he's one of the rare players where he can have a horrible shooting night, but still it can feel like he still impacted the game in a positive way. I don't feel
for
like we
sure.
can about a ton of guys if they're 3 for 19, right? You could have a scenario where maybe a superstar is like 10 for 25, right?
Yeah,
Normally a game where they're 3 for 19, but I just wanted to throw that out there because it does feel like he's kind of gotten to a point where they do need him because I think a lot of people, ourselves included, kind of question how well it would really work, but he's actually turned into a really important player for them.
yeah. He probably had the greatest 3 for 19 game I think I've ever seen in my life. Um, but I'm impressed with the Clippers. I think this is one that they needed. With Kawhi Leonard going off, dropped 38 points. He made it look so smooth and easy. Um, but this is a touted matchup, I think, because low key, spoiler it, I think whoever comes out of this matchup is probably going to the finals, because I think this is probably the roughest road I think to take. I think both of these teams are probably, the roughest teams to face in the West if you want to, in my opinion, because like I said, I think Denver has a few question marks. And so does Memphis. Those are two questionable teams for me. So I think, if you look at Phoenix, they're a scary roster because you've got Kevin Durant, Devin Booker. That's a scary combo, and then also Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton. That's a very stellar starting lineup. So I think that's probably the most feared starting lineup in the West. But then also you have the Clippers because it's Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. It's just a good squad, and I think they're just solid, very consistent. But like I said, I think whoever wins this matchup, comes out of the West. So if Phoenix wins, they're my pick to go to the finals, and if the Clippers win, then they're also my pick to go to the finals. I think this series is very pivotal. In how the rest of the playoffs is going to go. But I was very disappointed with the Suns. I thought they could have done a lot better. There's situations where, like you said, Chris Paul had the ball in his hands late in the game. I'm not a huge fan of that, especially now in his career where he's at. I would prefer, Kevin Durant take all the final shots. Or Booker, to be honest, just somebody a little bit more mobile, quicker, young. Um, Aiton, I'm all right with him having the ball in his hands, but like I said, I'd rather have Kevin Durant shooting a three than DeAndre Ayton shooting a mid range. If you ask me, but
Yeah,
I was impressed with the Clippers because Westbrook did have a huge impact, like you said, without really putting up 20, 30 points.
yeah, like I said, I just think with the Phoenix thing again, it's just they've only played you know 8 games prior to this one with their full lineup. So it's obviously going to take some time, and it's really tough, to go from that to go right into the playoffs. But again, when you're in the playoffs, you don't necessarily have any room for excuses or errors, right? You got to win these games. So big props to the Clippers because they were definitely, considered underdogs in this series, especially when Paul George went down.
Yeah,
I still think Phoenix will probably win this series, but I didn't expect it to be easy series, even though Paul George went down, because I know the Clippers have a lot of depth.
right.
Um, right, and Kawhi Leonard, obviously, he's as good as anybody, especially in these playoffs. And it's always really fun to see these two match up because we just haven't really gotten to see it or to
Yeah,
see it
and
because
yeah,
either one or the other has been hurt. And then obviously Durant was in Brooklyn, so we wouldn't have gotten those matchups until the finals,
right.
right? But it's nice to see those two battle it out again because since 2017, 18 or so, right? They've both been, incredible, especially, because considering where Kawhi was at earlier in his career, because for a while, right, Durant was much better.
Yeah. Um,
Um, yeah, go on.
and it's funny because like I was talking to my friend off the podcast. Obviously, he was like, "Yeah, Kawhi Leonard's better than KD." Right now, I don't think that's the case. I think Kevin Durant's better right now and all time. But that series
Sure.
where um in the finals where it was, Toronto versus the Warriors. I mean, they were going back and forth, and people don't really talk about that enough. KD did get hurt, obviously, but KD dropped 51, on that Raptors team, and Kawhi was on him for a long time. So I think that's kind of interesting. So we're kind of getting an earlier rematch of that per se, but I'm sure it's going to turn out amazing. And my pick for it, that series is definitely Phoenix, but I think whoever comes out is going to the finals.
And then we're wrapping it up with probably well, I guess that was kind of the ugliest game of the
If
night.
it was, yeah.
Yeah, Denver, Minnesota. Your dark horse, I
Hmm.
suppose. Yeah, not a great game for them. Lost 109 to 80. Carl Anthony Towns didn't really have a great game, right? 11 points.
Mm-mm.
I know a handful of those baskets were when the game was pretty much wrapped up, right? 5 of
Hmm.
15, 1 of 7. Rudy Gobert, not really any better, honestly, probably worse, even though he did have
Way
2
worse.
blocks, 13 boards. Right, neither of them played well. Mike Conley, okay, right? But, the rest of the squad, Anthony Edwards was 18 points, but 6 of 15. Nobody really played well for Minnesota.
Yeah.
Um, Denver, pretty much just an outstanding performance from them. Right in a game where Jokic only had 13 points, but even though he didn't have a huge scoring night, right, he was great on the boards and in terms of playmaking, he did foul out, which was
Hmm.
interesting, but it didn't matter, right? The game was well over by that point. I was confused as to why they were still playing, even though they were up by 30.
Right.
But I also, and again, just also shout out to some of Denver's role players, right? Caldwell Pope had a really good game.
Hmm.
Bruce Brown, this was kind of the game that if you're somebody that believes in Denver being able to come out of the West, this is the type of performance you wanted to see. Because I do think there were some people who thought that Minnesota could make this a competitive series, and it is one game, right? So we'll see what happens in game two. But I thought this was about as good as Denver's looked in a while because they had a lot of stretches to close the season where they didn't really look great, and you kind of wondered whether or not it was kind of them just kind of taking their foot off the gas and kind of saving it for the playoffs, or
Hmm.
maybe they're just not really as good as we thought. But
Right.
I think at least for this one game, they kind of showed, yeah, they're really good. And I do wonder what Minnesota does. Right at the end of the game, we saw Kyle Anderson get into it with Christian Brown, um, and it was just kind of a weird scenario
Yeah.
where I think it was like Christian Brown or I think Kyle Anderson went up to shoot it, right? And then Christian Brown kind of like tried to take the ball away from him, and then all of a sudden he just started grabbing at him and pulled him down. It was just strange.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I know it was a frustrating loss, right? But it just, at the end of the game, it's kind of pointless to do that. But overall, how did you feel about this performance from these teams?
Yeah, like you said, this is my dark horse, so I'm not happy about this, but at the same time, this is also the team that my MVP is on, for the Nuggets. So, like I said, I'm in a living dichotomy. I said that in the live stream, but with the Timberwolves, they just look gassed, and that's not the performance that I was expecting. I expected Towns to have a really good game, Gobert to be somewhat more of a presence. I know he's not the greatest on offense, but defensively he wasn't really there either. Edwards, I need him to be more consistent, and I need the other role players to pick it up as well. I expected a lot more from Mike Conley. That was I'm not gonna say embarrassing, but if you're Mike Conley, you can't let Jamal Murray, put up 24. You can't let him be the leading scorer. I just think in a
Yeah,
situation like that, Jokic, you can live with Jokic being the leading scorer, but anybody else, that's not a good sign. I think if you're trying to really slow this team down.
yeah, I will say I think that's Denver's kind of path to success is they kind of need everybody, to play really well because they
Hmm.
don't necessarily have the greatest bench, right? You have a couple
Exactly.
of guys like Bruce Brown, and I guess Jeff Green, right? But outside of that, you don't really have a ton of,
No.
really great options off the bench, right? Reggie Jackson, pretty much is out of the rotation, right? And he was the guy that they got in the buyout market.
Hmm.
Right, Thomas Bryant was a guy that they traded for at the trade deadline. He doesn't really play at all. Instead,
Yeah.
DeAndre Jordan's the guy that gets,
Hmm.
the backup center minutes as well as Zeke Naji. So, this is kind of the path for Denver, that they need. And again, it's kind of like what you mentioned with Phoenix. It's a tough path, right? Because they have to get through, after Minnesota, then they have to get through, whoever wins between Phoenix and the Clippers, right? And
Exactly.
then if they get to the conference finals, right, they have to go through, whoever comes out of like Memphis, LA, Sacramento, Golden State, right? Those four. So I mean, I think they can do it, right? And I think if you are somebody that thinks Denver can come out of the West, right, this was a pretty good showing. But just overall, like I said, a pretty solid effort for them. They're great at home, and it was good to see them, kind of show some life again because it didn't really feel like that, going into the playoffs. It felt like that this team was really vulnerable of going out early. But
Yeah.
for one game, I think that's a pretty resounding effort by them.
Yeah. I think their question marks definitely turned into exclamation points in this game. Um, but as a guy who picked Minnesota to potentially upset Denver, I'm not worried because, like you said, it's one game. But at the same time, there's a lot going on. I think on both sides of this matchup. Because with the Nuggets, it's a question of consistency, and with the Timberwolves, it's a question of consistency as well because you can't have Towns putting up 11. He's got to be putting up around like what 25 if they want to
Yeah,
actually get far in these playoffs and even have a chance at beating Denver. So I need to see them, shake the sluggish mentality because that was embarrassing. Like at one point I was literally playing NBA 2K while watching this game. That's
yeah.
how boring it was.
Yeah, for Minnesota to have a chance, I think Towns and Edwards are gonna have to be two of the three best players on the floor. And then
Exactly.
you still need solid performances from the rest of their starters, Mike Conley, Gobert. And then you need a couple of performances, from guys off the bench like Torian Prince and
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Anderson, right? Torian Prince had a goose egg, right? 0 points,
Yep.
0 for 4 from the field, just not enough. And obviously losing McDaniels hurts, right? I think if he was there, maybe he would make it a more competitive series. But I still think that Denver is better.
Oh
With
yeah,
the
for
Mike
sure.
Conley thing, we talked about it kind of with D'Lo as well, where kind of something that had been overlooked is that last year for the postseason, Mike Conley didn't really play that well. He had a game in the playoffs last year where I think he went scoreless against
Mm-hmm.
Dallas. And it kind of looked like he was maybe close to being done. Obviously, he had a solid regular season, but it is something to kind of think about where I do wonder if his ceiling in the playoffs isn't necessarily as high as it used to be, just because he's older now and
Right.
no longer as quick.
Yep.
Where he's much more reliant on his jump shot now, which he can obviously still shoot really well, but I don't know. It just feels like that this Denver team may be a little bit too fast for Minnesota, right? Because
It's a good
Denver can
point.
run up and down. Even with Jokic, right, who's not a super athletic guy, they can run up and down the floor. And I mean, it just feels like Minnesota is just like stuck in the mud with cement shoes. Considering this is kind of where a too big lineup probably hurts you a little bit. Because against a team that can run and play with pace, I mean, unless your bigs are really athletic, right? That's really hard to match up with. So I think this may be a quicker series, but we'll just have to see because again, it's one game.
Yeah, it'll play out soon.
Yeah. So I guess looking forward, we got two games tonight, right? Yeah. So we got Brooklyn, Philly, and we got Golden State, Sacramento. Going forward, I still think Philly will win this series, right? Even if they don't necessarily win tonight, I think it'll be a quick series. Golden State, I think, needs to bounce back. I think that they will, right? But obviously they need to win one of these home games, or else it's going to be really difficult to win this series. I mean, what do you think about these two games coming up tonight?
Yeah. I think these are interesting. I think these are probably going to be pivotal, mainly for the Warriors Kings one. Like I said with the Nets 76ers. I think that, I in my opinion it's a wash. 76ers got it. I think they're locked in. I don't think there's a chance for an upset there. But Warriors Kings, this one's interesting because um, if the Warriors tie it here, that's going to set the tone. But at the same time, if the Kings win, that's going to set the tone for them as well. So, if they take the 2-0 lead, that's going to hurt the Warriors' confidence. I'm not sure if they'll be able to shake that. But, if the Warriors can win this game and really, you know, game plan for really De'Aaron Fox. I think that's their number one issue. I think you can live with Malik Monk going off, but if you have Malik Monk and De'Aaron Fox going off, that's an issue. Because it seems like they did a good job handling Sabonis, for what he is, but you got to find the answer for Fox. But the question is, do they even have it? Because looking at their roster, it's not very you know, um, stacked up to counter somebody like De'Aaron Fox, and there may
Yeah.
be no counter.
It's just hard because you probably need somebody like Gary Payton out there to be able to guard De'Aaron Fox. But then if you do that, right, then you have him and Draymond, and those are two guys that you don't really have to worry about offensively. So it's gonna be a really tough matchup. I still think they will win the series.
Hmm.
It just comes down to just kind of like can they just play a little bit better defense, right? And just, I don't know, just because there were a couple of guys that like I said, I think Steph played well, but I feel like he could easily have another game where he has like, 38,
Hmm.
42, something like that. Um, right. And I think Clay has another, good game in him. right? So I think if you can just get slightly better performances from a couple other guys, right? We'll see. But you could also say the same about Sacramento. So we'll
Exactly.
see where this series goes. But that one, it looks like it's shaping up to be a pretty fun series, regardless.
Yeah, it's gonna be lit.
Yeah. Well, so that concludes today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, we appreciate all the support we got. 25 subscribers. I think that's a pretty significant
Yeah,
milestone. So we appreciate all the viewership, especially also in the live streams when we're reacting, post game to the playoff games and playing games. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for all the support, and we'll see you Friday.